It was a crisp autumn morning on October 12, 1978, just after 11 a.m., when whispers of trouble drifted down the corridor of the legendary Chelsea Hotel. The front desk, normally awash in chatter and clinking keys, went quiet. A fraught request had come in. Help needed in room 100. A bellboy, who offered a touch of heroism, quietly ascended the narrow, threadbare staircase. He slowly and carefully unlocked the door. The room's decor struck a familiar yet unsettling note. Shabby elegance, heavy drapes dust-covered, a battered vanity mirror, and just the soft hum of a tired ceiling fan. Beyond the door, in the bathroom under dim yellow light, a young woman lay motionless. There had been no struggle, no desperate exit, just an abrupt end. He didn't know it yet, but the moment unfolding before him would mark one of the darkest chapters in the Chelsea Hotel's infamous history. One that would linger, silently, in room 100. Rising 13 stories above West 23rd Street, between 7th and 8th Avenues, the Chelsea Hotel doesn't just sit in Manhattan, it lingers there. Heavy with history, thick with memory. A red brick monument wrapped in wrought iron balconies, steeped in time-worn grandeur, but with some stories best left, unopened. It was built in 1884, originally as a cooperative for artists, dreamers, and intellectuals seeking community. Bohemian by design, an idealistic fortress in the middle of a rapidly modernizing city. But over time, something changed. By the early 1900s, the Chelsea had transformed into a hotel, one that welcomed outcasts, geniuses, drunks, and the broken-hearted with open arms. They came from everywhere: writers, painters, filmmakers, rock stars, and rebels. Some found inspiration, others found oblivion. The building watched them all. Through its weathered walls and time-stained corridors, the hotel bore witness to brilliance and breakdowns, to creativity and chaos. And behind those doors, padded with decades of cigarette smoke and muffled voices, the line between genius and madness blurred. They say the Chelsea doesn't forget, that each room holds the residue of what came before, and the list of what came before is long and unsettling. This is where Dylan Thomas drank himself into his final days, where Mark Twain once stayed, and where Arthur C. Clarke wrote 2001, A Space Odyssey. But this is also where Nancy Spungen died, Sid Vicious unraveled, and photographer Billy Maynard was found bludgeoned to death in his 8th-floor room. And long before that, back in 1922, a woman named Atelka Graph severed her own hand and jumped from a 5th-floor window. Accidents? Coincidence? Or is the Chelsea something else, entirely? The Chelsea had already lived a lifetime by the 1920s. The world outside was roaring with jazz, prohibition, and shifting morals. But inside the hotel's walls, stories went quiet until they screamed. On a winter morning in December of 1922, a Hungarian-born woman named Atelka Graph checked into the hotel. Records describe her as elegant and well-dressed. She paid for a modest room on the 5th floor, alone. She left no note, made no requests, and no one who saw her arriving sensed anything out of place. That all changed within hours. According to contemporaneous reports, Graph barricaded herself inside the room. Staff heard no sound, no struggle. But when she didn't respond to repeated knocks, a manager opened the door, and what they found was unforgettable. Atelka Graph had severed her own hand at the wrist. Then, in that unimaginable state, panic or resolve, she leapt from the fifth-floor window to her death on the sidewalk below. The New York Times reported it in just a few lines. No family came forward. No motive was confirmed. Some claimed she had recently returned from Europe, that she was distraught. Others said she believed she was cursed. Her body was removed quietly. The sidewalk washed clean, and the fifth-floor window she jumped from was replaced. To this day, no official explanation has ever been given. They say the window sticks now, like something doesn't want it open. Some swear they've seen a woman in gloves pacing the fifth floor at night. But fact is stranger than fiction. A woman severed her own hand, then jumped to her death, in the Chelsea Hotel. And it would not be the last time someone entered quietly and became part of the darker story. Years passed. The city outside transformed, louder, faster, and sharper around the edges. But inside the Chelsea, time didn't quite behave the same. The faces changed, the furniture shifted, but the air, that thick, watching silence, remained. And then, in the fall of 1953, a man stepped into room 205, a poet, a drinker, and a legend in waiting. He came seeking rest, but he would find something else. By the time Dylan Thomas arrived at the Chelsea in late October of 1953, he was already drowning, in fame, in failure, and in drink. A Welsh poet with a lion's voice, Thomas had come to New York for a series of performances. He was placed in room 205, a modest room warmed by afternoon light, where the wallpaper had softened with time and the desk still carried the scent of old paper and ink. He called the Chelsea his home away from home, but in those final days, it became a kind of purgatory. Friends remember his decline, slurred readings, extended bar crawls, claims of having downed 18 whiskies in a row, though the truth, as with all things Chelsea, remains hazy. On November 4th, Thomas collapsed in the hotel. He was rushed to St. Vincent's Hospital in a coma. He never woke up. The official cause was pneumonia, complicated by heavy drinking. He died at just 39 years old. Not in the Chelsea, but never far from it. They say if you listen closely outside room 205, you can still hear the scratch of pen to paper and the low hum of verse recited to no one. Another name, another loss, another key, never returned. The hotel stood unchanged, even after Dylan Thomas slipped away. The poet's whiskey glass was quietly removed, the bed stripped, and the room was let again. Outside, New York changed once more. Shadows grew longer, buildings taller. But the hotel stood still, caught somewhere between eras and something older. By the 1970s, the world had lost its polish. The city was fraying at the seams, louder, rougher, more dangerous. In 1974, the Chelsea Hotel had slipped into a different kind of fame. The luster had dimmed. The glamour had given way to something grittier. Billy Maynard wasn't famous, not like the others. A freelance photographer, known mostly in downtown circles, he was quiet and reserved. He kept to himself on the 8th floor, where few rooms ever stayed occupied for long. On the night of August 3rd, neighbors reported nothing out of the ordinary. No shouting, no broken glass, just the usual creaks of old pipes and muffled music through the walls. But by morning, everything had changed. Housekeeping entered his room around 10:30 a.m. The door had been locked from the inside. Billy was found, bludgeoned to death. The scene was cold. His personal belongings were left untouched. There was no sign of forced entry, and no suspects were ever arrested. Some claimed it was a robbery, Others whispered it was over photographs he shouldn't have taken. No one knew for sure, and no one, it seemed, wanted to press too hard for answers. Over the years, guests who returned or stayed long-term have shared the same odd experience. They speak of the 8th floor corridor, colder than the rest, heavier and oddly quiet. And then, footsteps, soft, deliberate, and pacing, neither hotel staff nor passing guests. As if someone was still waiting for the door to unlock. One more time. Billy Maynard's murder remains unsolved, and the Chelsea, always watching, added another name to the list it never meant to keep. The police came and went. The 8th floor fell silent. Billy Maynard's name faded into the hotel's long memory. But the darkness didn't leave. Over the next 4 years, the Chelsea's mood soured. Fewer artists, more drifters, fewer dreams, more shadows. The line between resident and lost soul grew harder to see. And then, in 1978, the building didn't whisper its warning. This time, the silence broke, and what came next couldn't be undone. It was spring, April 20th, 1978, when the Chelsea lit up. No warning, no storm, just the sudden roar of flame. It began on the 6th floor, curling through plaster, swallowing wiring, crawling behind the walls like it knew the way. Within minutes, smoke had filled the upper floors. Tenants woke coughing, doors slammed, the alarms were old and slow, and the stairwells filled with panic. By the time the fire department arrived, it was chaos. Residents pouring onto 23rd Street barefoot, wrapped in bedsheets, eyes stung with smoke and disbelief. One person died. Their name barely made the papers. Others were hospitalized. The 6th floor was gutted. Some said it was faulty wiring, some said it was revenge, but others, those who had been there long enough to notice the patterns, said this was no accident. After the flames were out, few talked about it. The room numbers were replaced. The soot was scrubbed away. Life went on. But something had shifted. The building no longer just housed stories. It had started writing them. The smoke had barely cleared. The walls still carried the scent of char and ash. But the Chelsea didn't rest. Just 6 months later, tragedy returned. Not creeping, not hidden, but sharp, sudden, and unforgettable. This time, it was arguably the most infamous death in the hotel's long and troubled history, and it happened behind the locked door of room 100. The bellboy who'd answered the call for help stood still at the threshold of room 100. From inside, nothing. No voices, no movement, just silence. He slipped the key into the lock, turned it slowly, and the door creaked open. The air inside felt wrong, still and dense. There, in the bathroom, beneath a flickering light, lay Nancy Spungen, barely dressed and unmoving. Only 20 years old, known for her chaos, her brilliance, her edge. And now, she was gone. Her boyfriend, Sid Vicious, bassist for the punk band The Sex Pistols, was still in the room. He sat slouched, dazed, as if the night had drifted past him without warning. A knife rested nearby. The hours before that moment were unclear, and no one could quite agree on how it had really ended. There was no note, no noise, just the weight of what had happened, hanging in the stale air. Sid was arrested that day and charged with her murder. He said he didn't remember. Before the case could see trial, Sid was dead too, an overdose, just 4 months later. In the years that followed, room 100 was never quite the same. Not because of what had happened there, but because the hotel chose not to let it happen again. Quietly and discreetly, The room was dismantled, its walls reconfigured and its number erased. The old room 100 no longer exists. Not officially, not physically, just in memory and in the stories that Chelsea can't seem to leave behind. The door to room 100 was closed, but the story didn't end there. 4 months later, on a bitter February morning, far from the red brick hush of the Chelsea hotel, Sid's name surfaced again. This time not in suspicion, but in silence. What the hotel had started had finally finished itself elsewhere. And just like that, another chapter closed. The city had moved on, but Sid hadn't. In the months following Nancy Spungen's death, he drifted, through headlines, through courtrooms, through addiction. Out on bail, with a pending trial hanging above him, he stayed in and out of treatment, often seen glassy-eyed, unraveling in plain sight. On the night of February 1st, 1979, Sid attended a small gathering at an apartment on Bank Street in Manhattan's West Village. It was supposed to be a celebration. His bail had just been posted, and freedom, at least in the legal sense, had returned. But sometime during the night, something slipped. By the next morning, Sid Vicious was gone. The official cause, a heroin overdose, at just 21 years old. Some say it was an accident, others say it was planned, a final exit. A goodbye note was reportedly found, one he'd written earlier while in Rikers, expressing a wish to be reunited with Nancy. No trial, no verdict, no final answers, just a cold apartment, a quiet morning, and a city that hardly paused. The Chelsea never reclaimed him. He died elsewhere, but part of him never really left. The noise, the unraveling, the tragedy that began in room 100 found its final echo just a few miles away. And the building, whether it wanted to or not, absorbed every last trace. The evidence was thin, the timeline fractured. The man accused would never stand trial, and the woman at the center of it all. She was gone before she could speak. What remained were the questions. And in the decades since, the theories have multiplied, some grounded in fact, others in the dark corners of what-ifs and unfinished confessions. This is what they say. Theory 1. Sid did it, but he didn't remember. The most accepted version, at least officially, is also the simplest. Sid Vicious stabbed Nancy Spungen in a drug-induced haze, then collapsed beside her, unable to comprehend what he'd done. In the hours that followed, he gave contradictory statements, telling police, "I did it, but I didn't mean to kill her," before later claiming he remembered nothing at all. The room showed no signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds, just the two of them, and a single knife. They had been high for days. Neighbors reported shouting, a loud thud. Then, silence. It's easy to imagine that things spiraled fast, and by the time Sid realized what had happened, Nancy was already gone. It's the version the police leaned on, the one the tabloids ran with. But it left too much unsaid and too much unproven. Theory 2. A third party. When the bellboy arrived that morning, the door to room 100 was locked from the inside. He used the master key to open it and stepped into silence. But what happened before that moment remains unclear. There were no signs of forced entry, no scuffle, no scream anyone could confirm. Just Nancy, alone and lifeless. Sid, heavily sedated, claimed he didn't remember anything, but some say he wasn't the only one who'd been there that night. One name floats to the surface more often than others: Rocket's Red Glare, a bodyguard, dealer, and part-time actor with a habit of drifting through scenes like this one. He was reportedly at the hotel that night, delivering drugs. In the years after, He allegedly bragged about robbing the room while Sid was unconscious. Some even claimed he hinted at being involved in the stabbing itself. Another man, known only as Michael, was rumored to have fled the scene with a wad of missing cash. If someone came in, they didn't stay long, and they left no proof behind. Just a girl in the bathroom, a boy lost in chemicals, and a door that only opened again when it was far too late. Theory 3. Nancy was responsible. Then there's the theory that no one wants to believe because it's the quietest and the most tragic. That Nancy did this herself. She'd threatened it before. Friends remembered moments where the darkness seemed to take hold. Some say they had fought that night over money, drugs, or maybe nothing at all. That during a moment of rage or despair, she could have not been thinking clearly. The wound was singular, almost clinical. There were no bruises, no chaos. It could have been a final gesture, a test, or maybe she never expected it to be fatal. But if this was a cry for help, it was answered too late. Theory 4. A pact between them, broken or fulfilled. This is the darkest version of all. Not murder, not robbery, but a pact that they had agreed, together, to end things. Sid had written about death while locked up at Rikers. Friends say he spoke of it often, the idea that if Nancy went, he wouldn't stay behind. After his own death, a note surfaced. It read, "We had a death pact, and I have to keep my half." Maybe Nancy wanted to go first. Maybe Sid was supposed to follow. Maybe he hesitated. Or maybe he never got the chance to fulfill it fully on his own terms. But if they meant to leave the world behind together, one of them made it out that night at the Chelsea. Over the decades, the Chelsea Hotel became more than just a place to sleep. It became a vault for secrets, for tragedy, for names written in the dark. Dylan Thomas collapsed there after days of drinking, his words silenced forever in room 205. Atelka Graph, grieving, severed, and desperate, leapt from the 5th floor. Billy Maynard, beaten to death just feet from where tourists now sip wine. Flames swept through the 6th floor in 1978, taking one more life before the smoke cleared. And then came room 100, Nancy Spungen, Sid Vicious, and only questions left behind. A room so soaked in infamy, they changed its number just to let it rest. Some say it worked. Others say the energy never really left, because places like the Chelsea don't forget. They absorb, layer by layer, name by name. And for every story that made the headlines, there are others that never made it out of the walls. Some buildings echo, but this one is haunted by the secrets that it holds.